Hi, everyone. Welcome to Epic Chats. My name is Jennifer Shu, and I'm the head of US development here at Epic Foundation, which fights to change the lives of disadvantaged children and youth around the world through our portfolio of high impact organizations. So first, a little bit of housekeeping. Today's chat will include an opportunity to ask our fabulous or burning questions during the AMA. So as you think of them, please add them to the questions tab or upvote the ones you'd like answered. So with that, over to you, Pac.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being with us today. I'm Pac, Pierre-Arnold, in charge of EPIC for Belgium and Luxembourg. As you may know, the EPIC Pledge is a great way for entrepreneurs and investors to add purpose into your business life. And it's also the opportunity to join a great community, the community of pledgers. As a pledger, you promise to give to social good a small percentage of your success when you exit. The EPIC Pledge is not legally binding. It's very simple, and you only give if you succeed. Today, we welcome one of our wonderful pledgers as a guest, also an iconic Belgian entrepreneur, CEO and co-founder of Rosa, Sébastien Deletaille. Thank you so much, Seb, for being here and for being part of our community of engaged entrepreneurs.
Thank you, Pac.
Before you dive with Jennifer into your journey, allow me to tell you that at EPIC, we are all about giving back. For each webinar of our series, the speaker chooses one organization from our 26 high-impactful social organizations in our portfolio, helping vulnerable children and youth around the world. Sébastien has chosen to support B Code, who many of you may know. B Code is the next generation of training centers active in 5 cities across Belgium and provides training programs on digital technologies free of charge for job seekers and underprivileged youth. You'll see now, I think you'll see a donation link pop up on your screen. You can click on it and it will open a new window and won't take you away from our Epic chat. Please give what you can, any amount will do. And today, B Code will receive 200% of your donation. Why 200%? Because first of all, at EPIC, we don't take any commission. And chiefly because Sébastien generously agreed to match all donations that will be made today. Thank you so much, Sébastien, for pledging to EPIC and for sharing your success. Hope you enjoyed the discussion. Back to you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Pac. So, Sébastien, you're one of our earlier pledgers. Can you tell us why you signed the Epic Pledge?
Sure. So I think when you become an entrepreneur, obviously you're driven by this desire to launch a company, to make it grow, to have a great product, and so those are really elements that resonate with a lot of entrepreneurs. But there's also another dimension, which is sometimes you also become an entrepreneur for financial purposes. You hope one day to sell your company and to make a successful exit. The thing is, before you make that exit, it is interesting to already think of how you can, support, philanthropical, initiatives, how you can support foundations. And that's why, as a tech entrepreneur, I've made the decision to give a percentage of my future exits to a foundation such as Epic. And the reason why I was seduced by Epic rather than any other foundation is because you're extremely smart in selecting social entrepreneurs that have a huge potential for scaling. And that's something that I like a lot, because in tech entrepreneurship, we like to scale. We like to find initiatives that can impact a lot of people. And so just like a venture capitalist, you've been selecting social entrepreneurs that have this potential to impact a lot of people. And then the second reason why I like the Epic Foundation is because you support these social entrepreneurs for multiple years, which allows the entrepreneur to focus on impact and results rather than focusing on continuous fundraising programs. You see, and so I just wanted to let everyone know it's super easy to pledge. You just give a percentage. If your exit never happens, doesn't matter. And if it does, whatever the amount, you just give that percentage over, and it goes 100% to associations that impact at scale. And I think that's cool. That's all.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. We love having you part of the community. And I think especially today, we appreciate your choice in fashion. So thanks for supporting Epic. So I want to go back a little bit in time to when you joined McKinsey as the first step in your career. What type of projects did you work on there?
Look, I mean, when I started my career, I was touching all sorts of, let's say, consulting projects in all sorts of industries, geographies, and functions. And I was just very lucky because I started my career there just before the financial crisis of 2008. And so I had really the opportunity to learn, I can grow in an environment where everything was possible. And then I had my first experiences in the telecom world and working on telecom data.
So after McKinsey, I was surprised to learn that you launched not one, two, but 3 startups at the same time. So what was that like, and where did it lead?
So clearly, with my co-founder Loïc Jacobs, we were very much at the image of a lot of younger entrepreneurs nowadays. We want to be entrepreneurs, but we don't know what to do. And so we have this general first habit of looking for ideas. Let me reinvent social media for Zara or stuff like that. Outside in entrepreneurship in a way. And with Loïc, just after our consulting career, we had basically launched 3 ideas. One of them was around preventing the flu with sanitation gel, alcoholic, sanitation gel. One of them was around real impact. And then the final one was around Web 2.0 customer care. And out of those 3 ideas, we were very lucky because 2 of them went bust very fast. And it's actually great to fail very fast because then you can move on to the things that work very well. And that adventure was Real Impact that turned into Reactor a few years later.
So going one step back, what is a short amount of time? Was it 3 months, 6 months, a year?
So the ideas that went bust, the one on sanitation gel went bust within 3 months. Quite literally, the French and the Germans invaded Belgium, and so their sales price was below our production price, which is the technical definition of bankruptcy. And so that idea dropped very, very fast. And it was a blessing because at the same time, Real Impact was starting to pick up. And since we still had a bit of free time because it was the beginning of RIA, we had the possibility to test another idea in parallel. That one never really died, but it was just Real Impact had so much more traction. At some point, we just said, let's focus and let's just go on telecom big data.
Got it. So with Real Impact Analytics, and just to clarify, it was recently rebranded as Reactor. You were helping telcos optimize your internal ops, which is my understanding.
Yeah.
When did you realize that the telco data you were crunching had much larger implications for social good?
So it was at a conference in Boston, we were with a few colleagues, and the Gates Foundation, members of the Gates Foundation came up to us and said, hey guys, you know what? You're at a really interesting crossroad. You're working in emerging markets in the field of analytics with telecom operators. And this is amazing. Why don't we use this crossroad for development purposes? Can we realize sustainable development goals together? At the time, they were still called Millennium Goals. And with the Gates Foundation, they basically said, we're ready to fund you if you try and find relationships, links between how people use their phone and basically problems like poverty alleviation. On that type of problem, the Gates Foundation was delighted with the type of impact that we had, and they quite naturally pushed us to work on other problems, such as food crises and disease prevention. And that's where in 2014, we had the possibility to interact with the Gates Foundation, with the MasterCard Foundation, but also with bodies of the United Nations in order to work on like the Ebola crisis. And that was the real first time that we had the possibility to use, let's say, telecom data to combat epidemics.
I want to talk about the timing. There was a little bit of serendipity that happened, right? I remember when we were speaking earlier, you said that your startup was the only private company that was in Liberia and Sierra Leone when Ebola hit, right?
Yes.
And so take us back to that conversation where you were in the field, this pandemic was breaking out. How did the pieces come together for you to ultimately create this initiative called Data for Good?
Sure. So, at the time, we were a very limited set of actors in the field of data for good. There were, world leaders such as Flowminder, that's based in Sweden. There was a department of the United Nations called Global Pulse. And then you basically had a whole set of, professors from universities in Harvard, from the MIT, and the like, that had been working on, using telecom data for a whole set of social issues, namely in Haiti, when there was the earthquake and all of the disaster relief programs that took place at that time. And so when Ebola occurred, basically, quite naturally, that huge community came together and said, how can we leverage all of our models, our mobility matrices, all of our scripts, basically all of the technical and mathematical manners to crunch your telecom data in order to make relevant analysis to prevent the propagation of the disease. And this community basically said, okay, well, who's active in West Africa? And so we were the only actor that had installations with 2 telcos in Liberia and Sierra Leone. That means that our software was crunching telecom data even before the crisis. We had teams that had gone to those countries to train the telecom staff, to meet with the executives. And it's from there that we were able to build a consortium with UNICEF and with the United Nations Global Pulse in order to say, okay, we have access to the data, you get the government approval, and then let's start crunching this data, because as you know, Ebola had a very similar propagation rate than COVID-19, but had a much higher mortality rate.
Right.
We were, when you were contaminated, your chances of dying was anywhere between 60 and 80%. And so when you have that level of morbidity, as a government, you need to make very, very drastic decisions on lockdowns to prevent the disease from spreading.
So before you stepped in, what kind of data was the government working with?
That's the thing which is crazy, is that in these countries, there was no data. And you need to realize that in some African countries, even elections don't matter. And so why have a census of your population? If you don't need it for elections, why bother? And so you were actually going into geographies where there was no infrastructure. And so as a government, when you have close to no visibility on what's happening in your country, and you're hit with this type of public healthcare epidemic, telecom data was seen as an amazing alternative, like a real solution, because we were able to support the government with fully anonymized and aggregated analyses, right? So it's never a question about targeting individuals. It's never a question about getting your phone number or getting the list of people who did not respect the quarantine. That was not the issue. The issue was using this data in an anonymized and aggregate manner in order to give visibility for the government, in order for it to act. Quite specifically, in Liberia, for example, we were working hand in hand with UNICEF to decide where quarantine zones needed to be set. And so that's a very difficult question, because you see a number of cases appearing in a geography. It becomes an infectious cluster. To prevent that cluster from spreading, you basically want to quarantine that zone. You want to make sure that there's no more outgoing or ingoing mobility, and that people that are contaminated within this infectious cluster don't go to the next, urban center, hang around, go see family, infect other households, and that new urban center becomes the next infectious cluster. And so we were, with the help of UNICEF, looking at one particular infectious cluster and saying, this is where you need to set quarantine zones, because from this infectious cluster, and based on the normal mobility of people, this is where people are going to go next. And that's why the quarantine zone matters. In the case of Ebola, obviously, we were in much more severe actions than in COVID-19. So there we were talking about real lockdowns. We were talking about preventing people from moving. There were police vans blocking roads, and the idea of measuring the mobility was also allowing us to see which quarantine zones were working and which were not. And this was the first time in human history that we were measuring the effectiveness of quarantine zones.
Wow, that's really impressive. I mean, it sounds like before that, there was no way to really monitor real time this mobility data. And during the time of Ebola, with the mobility rate being so high, I mean, the stakes were very, very high. So, sorry, really quickly, right now we're going to transition into the AMA session. So if anyone has questions to add, please do so in the questions tab. And over the next few minutes, we'll try to pull in the questions that are burning in your minds. So please go ahead and do that. And then back to you, Sébastien.
So maybe just, obviously the objective of this webinar is not for me to show off too much. It's more for you to ask questions, and don't hesitate to go in any form of direction. You'll see that I'll be very happy to give you a lot of details. Just before we jump into the questions, I'll give you 2 or 3 elements on what happened in Belgium, because you see the things that are similar between Ebola and COVID-19 is obviously these are both infectious diseases, and they're transmitted person to person through physical contacts. Okay, that's the main mechanism of transmission of the disease. And some people ask, okay, well, Seb, why do you want to use mobile data to basically combat this disease? It's quite simple. It's because through telecom data, we have a proxy for human contact. You see, and that kind of sounds reasonable, right? It sounds logical. You say to yourself, well, when do I have contacts with people? Well, I'm going to drive to go see my parents, and then I give them a hug, or I kiss them, or I shake their hands, or I go to the office, or I go to the doctor, I salute him. And so actually, the number of trips you make in a day is significantly correlated with the number of contacts you have. And so with a disease like COVID-19, that means that it's a proxy to detect how the disease is probably going to be transmitted, and it's going to be a proxy on where the disease is going to propagate. So that's why we're using that data source to understand the current situation and then predict how the situation is going to be evolving. And in the case of the Belgian government, we basically took a use case centric approach where we really wanted to understand who's going to be our key stakeholder, what's the problem that the stakeholder is confronted with, and how can telecom data help? And I just wanted to give you 2 examples to make it very, very tangible. So, for example, in a first use case, if I'm the Prime Minister of Belgium and I realize that I have very limited visibility on the impact of confinement measures, as a Prime Minister, I'm asking myself the question, well, should I reinforce? Should I reduce? or should I maintain the confinement measures? That is an example of a use case on which we worked. Another use case is, as a Minister of Health, I want to predict where the disease is going to propagate. And you're going to see, hopefully, through our questions, we're going to go into more details on how that works. But you see that this use case-centric approach made it very, very tangible to link the mobile data to questions that were being asked by the key stakeholders. And so we didn't make the mistake of saying, hey, we have great data, look what we can do with it. We were directly asking, well, what's the real policy question? And then making sure that the telecom data would be helpful for that purpose. Okay?
Great. So I'm looking through the questions now, and I do see that some folks are sensitive to the topic of like privacy, transparency. Could you speak to how you can ensure that's protected?
Sure. So, a lot of people sometimes have the impression that as soon as we say we're going to be processing your mobile data, they have this episode of Black Mirror that comes up and they say, oh my God, Big Brother's here. We're going to spy on everyone at scale. This is surveillance en masse, and there you go. Belgium is going to have its own, September 11th, legislation reform, and that's, you couldn't be further from reality. What we do to protect privacy is a set of things. The first, which everyone should remember, is that Belgium is part of the European Union and applies, the GDPR legislation, which is an amazing legislation to protect citizens' rights, to protect your privacy, and to make sure that the mass surveillance that I was just referring to from Black Mirror is just, illegal. And so we need to work within the legal framework of GDPR. That means that for us to work on mobile data, we worked hand in hand with the Data Protection Authority, which is an independent body that controls the effective respect of GDPR. So they have the right to say that something is illegal. They have the right to condemn the government or any citizen if they do not respect GDPR. And so we went to them to secure a pre-authorization of all the analysis that were going to be made. It's with them that we demonstrated that all of the data that we were going to be processing was fully anonymous, fully aggregated. That means that the type, and I'll give you examples of the data that we produce, but it means that you can never be re-identified as a person. And it's thanks to these guarantees that the Data Protection Authority said, hey, you know what, this is good. This does respect the legal framework, it does respect privacy, and it's going to create value. And so it's an obvious go. Just to give you an idea, with your data, with your mobile data, your phone is basically constantly collecting signaling information. Because for a call to be routed to your phone, the mobile network operator needs to know where you are. And so that data, can be aggregated and anonymized to say, for example, well, yesterday there were 150 people that went from 1000 Brussels, which is the zip code in which I am now, to the neighbor zip code 1050, which is XL. That is an example of a metric that is produced through our work that is fully anonymous and aggregated. No one knows if there was one person that did 150 trips or if it's 150 people that did one trip. It is extremely difficult, if not impossible, to try and re-identify who those people would be. And these are the types of anonymization techniques that we were applying, aggregation, but also whenever there were less than 30 people in any combination of zip codes, that information would be deleted. And as a result, the information that was given to government was really aggregates of huge masses of people. And it's these aggregates that were evolving over time. We were able to measure that on average, pre-confinement, Belgians were making 2.7 trips outside of their residential zip code. And in the confinement, that went down to 1. So that means that people reduced anywhere between 50 and 70% their mobility outside of their residential zip code. And some people said, oh, well, that's kind of obvious. I just need to look at my window. There's no one in the street, so I know that mobility has been reduced. Yeah, that's true. But how would you say mobility compares today with mobility 2 weeks ago? Does it change during the Easter weekend because it's sunny? Now that we're in deconfinement, have people gone back directly to their normal behavior, or are they still 30 to 40% less? And thanks to the mobile data, we were able to create this mobility index that's given to the government every week, and that was used, for example, to decide not to reinforce, not to reduce, but simply to maintain the confinement. And it's based on this data that they said we've made sufficient progress combined with the contagion data in order to start the deconfinement. You see, and so these are examples to show you concretely what we were doing, how we were respecting privacy, and how it was useful for the government.
I see. Thank you so much. So I'm looking at the other questions that have come through. One question is about how governments choose tech solutions or tech providers. Was there sort of an open call to action for innovative solutions that were out there, or how was this task force formed?
Yes. So look, I mean, here, like it all started because we basically, so Frédéric Pivetta and Laurent Hublet, we are the 3, let's say, instigators of this Data Against Corona task force. And with my 2 other co-founders, we had basically published an opinion piece in one of Belgium's big economic newspapers, where we were explaining our prior experience in regard to Ebola and basically inviting the government to say, hey, why don't you act on this? Like you have even funded some of these initiatives for them to take place in countries like Uganda. So you think this is good enough for other countries? Why don't we do the same in Belgium? And so in that process, basically, we had started off with the government to say, look, let's make our experience relevant to you. Very quickly, we were followed by the national mobile network operators. By the way, a huge thank you to Proximus, to Telenet, and to Orange, because those 3 mobile network operators were amazing in this process. They were not only providing their anonymized and aggregated data, they were giving support from their teams. They were very, very involved to make sure that this respected privacy and that like it would happen. And it's thanks to their support that we were then able to convince the government to say, okay, let's set this up and let's go. Like typically the government, was in a crisis mode, and so there was a state of emergency. And in this state of emergency, like the government had the possibility to say, okay, well, are these people, experts? Are they vetted? Are they credible and reliable? Hence, can we work with them? And that was the setup that we had with the government. We were lucky because there were a lot of initiatives that were also, positive and that wanted to help. But it was a state where the government had so much decisions to make. We were very lucky to go through and be able to make our results relevant for them.
Thank you. So often there's this perception that government takes a really long time to make decisions. Can you tell us about the timeline for the task force and sort of some of the results that came out?
So actually, that's a great point, which is Belgium in this particular case actually was probably one of the most agile governments across Europe. In Belgium, we tend to be very humble. We don't like to brag. We don't like to show off. But in this case, we should show off because Belgium was a great example of agile, of agility, of moving fast. we had the opportunity between the opinion piece and our kickoff. There was roughly 48 to 72 hours. You needed to add another 5 days to get the legal framework secured, and then another 2-3 days to get our first results out. And so end to end, between the opinion piece and the first results shared with government, there were 10 days. And that is not the average speed that most people think of when they think of government. And so this was a really great example of a partnership between civil society, like private companies like telcos, and then government, of course. The second thing, which is very important, is obviously these results kept on evolving. There was exploration that was being made on the data. There were new analyses that were introduced. And then that's where we had the possibility to move out of just mobility matrices and then start to make interactions and joint research with other task forces. For example, the task forces of spatial epidemiologists. And that's when we were starting to make maps to predict where the disease would propagate. And the data is literally feeding the work of the spatial epidemiologists that are active in Belgium. And so this has all been done thanks to the pre-approval of the Data Protection Authority, through the impulse of the government, and of course, as I mentioned, through the support of the telecom operators, because they're the ones who made this possible. They were providing the raw material.
Wow. 10 days, that's really impressive. How does it compare with the speed with which you moved in Africa?
So that's really a point that we were when we were active in Africa, we were talking with the economists. They were covering the topic, and I reached out to the journalist that was in charge of the topic at the time, showing the contrast where for Ebola it took us 6 months to get the government approvals for UNICEF, the United Nations, and us to work together. 6 months. Imagine how much lives had been lost in that process. Whereas in Belgium, we managed to get this up and running in 10 days. And at the end of the day, when you look at the Belgian, say, figures, the confinement measure was decided right on time. We managed, when we say flatten the curve, we literally flattened the curve right on time. We were skimming, that maximum capacity of, intensive care units. And we really literally managed to flatten that. And then now we're getting the main results of the deconfinement and of the confinement and the main decrease in the number of patients in intensive care. And so I'm just happy that we were able to obviously offer a portion of the information that was required to curve, to flatten the curve. But obviously, most of the effort and the results are the result of the healthcare workers, are the result of the government, and they need to get all of the credit. We were a very, very minor component of the decision making.
Thank you. I want to look towards the future a little bit. What's the next step for the task force?
So typically for the moment, we are in a dynamic where we're in full support of the government. It's the government that decides whether they want to extend analyses, extend the type of work and the like. And so for the moment, they're the ones that manage the communications on where the task force is going forward. We're really there in support. It's not always easy, to be honest, because obviously where this venture is by nature temporary, where we're not full-time, data against Corona task force members. And so on the side, we have our other ventures. And so we need to be able to have the cohabitation between supporting the government in its needs and in the mandates. And then at the same time, continue to manage the companies that we're launching. Behind me, you basically see all of the mock-ups of the next, software that we're developing. And so that's where I'm balancing my time. Got
it. Well, that brings me to another cluster of questions that we got through the AMA. Your current startup, Rosa. So I know that it's still in stealth mode, but I'm hoping that you can drop some hints just for those in the room today.
Sure. So look, for the last year and a half, I've been working in digital health, and it's a space filled with potential. Like particularly in Europe, like we invest so much in healthcare. It's such an area of concern. Like we really see this as a universal right, and we've put huge amounts of money in our healthcare system, in our healthcare infrastructure. But when you look at it from a digital perspective, it's still kind of late. And like the best question that I like to ask to Belgians is, hey, where do you keep your medical data? And then they're like, I don't know, like, or I don't manage the data, or it's in a folder somewhere, or my doctor manages that, or isn't there a platform where I could get access? And so bottom line, let's say my observation is that it would be an amazing future to enable patients to take control of their health, to be able to have all of their health data in one single location on an app on their smartphone, that this app would be incredibly secure, incredibly safe. And that from that app, they would not only get like all of the targeted content for their own, let's say, conditions, like medical questions, medical priorities, but also most importantly, that they would get all of the benefits from, let's say, the latest technological innovations. I mean, what's happening in regard to big data or artificial intelligence applied to healthcare is amazing. Don't you think that like Belgian patients, if they have an MRI or if they have a PET scan, wouldn't you want to be able to have that scan analyzed by the AI from the Mayo Clinic or from Stanford? Like, wouldn't you want like to have the best possible medical advice if you have a very rare disease? And so I'd very much like Rosa to be that app that's going to support you in your health questions. I'm going to be fighting for the next 3-5 years to make sure that vision, let's say, turns into reality. And the thing which is great is that I found a partner that's really to invest 3 years of development so that we create this app from scratch. And it's going to give us time to find the right business model. And so the first objective is to create value for patients and then figure out how to make it work financially. And so that's going to be a very, very exciting like opportunity going forward.
We're excited to see where Rosa takes you. I mean, it's a really important space to work in, and I wish Rosa were completely scaled up now, because we certainly need more hands on deck in the digital health space. So I want to pull, I know we're going a little bit over time. We've had so many great questions come through. So thank you everyone for sticking around a little bit longer. So another question that was high up on the list is cultivating a giving culture in your organization. Yep. So I know with Reactor, you grew it from 2 to 100. Yep. And so, what is your vision for cultivating a giving culture in Rosa as you scale up your new startup?
I think, like the thing that I like a lot with Alexander, like the founder of Epic, is he always asks people the same question, which is, what prevents you from giving more? Like how could we make philanthropy the norm? And I like that question a lot, because it comes down to, hey, when was the last time that I gave money for a good cause? We were talking about B Code in the introduction, and I'm sure that there are a few people on the webinar that participated at B Code programs. And it's a great association. We want to see B Codes thrive. We want like thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people go through B Code programs. And so for that to happen, we can either say, oh, well, it's always going to be the state that's going to give money, or we can act ourselves. And that's where like encouraging every and each one of us to say, well, how am I acting as a philanthropist? Even if it's for €5, even if it's for €50, even if it's for a percentage of a potential exit in the future, it doesn't matter the amount. It's just create the habit that you see philanthropy as a norm. If you change yourself and make giving the norm, most likely you're going to be contagious. Most likely you're going to start influencing your wife, then your kids, maybe your family, maybe your coworkers. And the more we make that the norm, I think the better society we will live in. And the only advice that I have, because I saw that there were some participants in the call that are also fellow pledgers or fellow entrepreneurs, it's so easy to commit a percentage of an exit because it's a future event. It's very conceptual. And when you do that before your exit, it's simple. It doesn't hurt. And then when you come to the moment when that exit happens, you're happy because you respect the promise that you made and you say, this is great. This is something that I actually want to do. And I think that once you pledge once, you'll pledge for the rest of your life. And so the key question for you is, why haven't you pledged already?
I think that's a perfect place for us to wrap up. And Sébastien, I mean, thank you so much for all of the pearls of wisdom that you've shared today. Thank you for all of the hard work that you've done to combat not only Ebola and Zika, but COVID-19 today in Belgium and beyond. Really inspiring work. And again, really looking forward to seeing where Rosa goes. And to all of our viewers, thank you for joining us and sticking around a little bit longer. You might have seen a pop-up on your screen to register for the next webinar. So again, same day, same time. It's an epic chat with Frederick Helm on reinventing public transportation next Wednesday. So please sign up for that. And then last but not least, we want to ask you all for a favor. When the webinar ends, please stick around for an extra 5 seconds. You'll automatically see our little Super Bowl commercial about the pledge. And I think Sébastien did a really great job of kind of explaining why he was inspired to give and why it's a sort of easy solution to weave purpose into your life and business. So we do see other pledgers and entrepreneurs here with us today from the pledge community. So want to give a shout out to Dimitri DeBose from BSIT. Thanks for being here today. And yeah, we're basically a really cool community with good fashion sense. So please stick around, yes, for an extra 5 seconds. Check out the pledge. Reach out if you want to learn more and join us next week for another amazing conversation. So again, Sébastien, I could not thank you more for your time and excited to see where all of these different projects take you. So
thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.